I think creativity can live anywhere. But I think often we have to remind ourselves of that truth because it's easy to fall into a rut.
This is Therapist Clubhouse, a podcast for private practice entrepreneurs. I'm Annie Schusler. This week, I'm talking to Loretta Staples, a private practice entrepreneur in Connecticut. Listen as we talk about how she nurtures her creativity to improve her life and her business. She'll also tell you how to start nurturing yours. Welcome, Loretta. Thank you so much for being with me.
Thanks, Annie. Glad to be here.
You are in an interesting situation right now that I thought people would really want to hear about. So you told me in an email, you told me that you're 64 now,
Yes.
and you've had many careers before you were a therapist.
Yep.
And you're in the middle of building this new business that weaves together a lot of the different places that you've been before. So
Yes.
we're definitely going to go to different places, but let's jump into hearing about your new business, The More Creative Therapist.
Okay. I'm launching a new online business. I'm developing an online course and coaching program to help therapists, counselors, and coaches be more creative. And part of that is developing creative skills that have to do with creative problem solving, making things, working through creative blocks in order to bring a more creative use of self to the work that we do with our clients in sessions. So that's my latest project. But I actually became a therapist. I'm going to say only because you mentioned my age, so I hope that shows kind of the time spans that I'm considering. But I became a therapist 10 years ago. I got my master's in social work 10 years ago. And I got that degree after having many other careers, mostly in the area of design and visual communication and education. So my formal training kind of before that and my professional practice was really as a designer. And so visual communication is the area that I practiced in. It's the area that I taught in. And I had been what was called then an e-business strategist consultant in New York City for a brief period of time during the dot-com boom and bust. And actually 9/11 happened during that time. And actually our company, we lost a staff member in 9/11 in the World Trade Center. And our company was also falling apart. And so that was a very kind of critical, chaotic, confusing time for people like me who worked in the technology area, certainly for all of us who were living in New York City. And in terms of like the nation, the world, a lot of things just seemed to be really changing. And actually at that point in my life, I became like quite lost, I have to say. I didn't know what to do with myself.
But so something was telling you that it was time to make a change?
Yeah. And I think I knew that before. And I had actually started studying drawing and painting in New York City when I was living there because, I'll be honest with you, I was not happy with the work that I was doing. And studying drawing and painting gave me a sort of it really gave me a different world and a different way of engaging myself in the world, kind of through making work instead of solving problems. As a designer, you do a lot of problem solving. And one thing that I often tell people is, in a way, at that time in my life, I was tired of solving problems. I wanted to sort of make some problems. And there's nothing like making artwork to kind of enter a whole new zone of like possibility. And so, I'm kind of getting lost in the sequence of events. But to make a long story short, I actually relocated. I left New York City. I moved to Connecticut. I cashed out my retirement accounts, and I actually spent 3 years painting, living in a loft, and also wondering what I was going to do with myself. I had no idea, and I say this, and people often think I'm joking, but I'm serious. At that time, you could still look for classified ads, like in the New York Times and the Sunday paper. And I would do that, and I would literally wonder what letter of the alphabet I should look under, because that's how undecided I was about what I should be doing.
Mm.
And anyway, I could.
So I want to stay with that for a minute. Was it
Sure.
scary to have everything up in the air at that point?
Quite honestly, yes and no.
Mm.
And I think that that's one of the mysteries of, I think, creativity and a creative journey. That is something that I hope to share in the business that I'm developing now. For me, creativity has often provided a very sort of paradoxical path through life and through the world. And so, for instance, people maybe observing me from the outside will say things like, "Oh, Loretta, you're so courageous. You're such a risk taker." I'll hear those kinds of comments. But internally, from me, from my heart, my soul, my spirit, whatever, that's not how it feels. It just feels like this is what I should be doing, or this is what I need to be doing, or this is what I am doing, quite honestly, because it always has that present tense feeling to it. And so there's a kind of naturalness of a kind of path unfolding that feels so natural. And I always feel so in my element when I'm following that it really doesn't feel particularly scary.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, yeah, there are the practical issues of, like, how am I going to pay the rent or the mortgage or for the car payment or whatever. And yeah, those practical concerns are definitely there. And I faced that too, because I knew that I couldn't sort of live in this loft and paint forever. I had a finite amount of money I was working with. I was struggling to figure out what I would do to earn a living. And I did end up working. I actually taught in New York City. I taught design management. And then, I'm sorry, I could spend hours kind of just talking about this period in my life, and I don't want to kind of go on into too much. But I did ended up moving. I found the house of my dreams in the middle of nowhere. I rearranged my entire life to be in this place that I found to be very charged with a kind of, I don't know, it felt like the place for me to be. I still didn't know what to do with myself, however, but I had faith that would emerge, and sure enough, it did.
So, Loretta, is there something about, do you think that creativity and intuition are really linked?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I do. I'm so glad you asked that. And in my experience, both as a designer and as an artist, there's a sort of complementarity between the two. And this is just sort of my point of view. There are many people would beg to differ with me. But I think the more artistic side and the more artistic way of sort of doing things and being is more intuitive, more sensed, much more mysterious. And the design part of me is much more sort of problem solving-y, but in a kind of interesting, structured, systematic way. But I think they're two sensibilities, and they are two different minds. And I do feel that those two minds can come together beautifully in the therapy process when we're working with our clients.
Yeah. And do you think somehow the intuitive, mysterious, more creative side has gone dormant for a lot of us?
I do. I do. And I think there are reasons for that. I think some of the reasons are external. There's a huge push for, evidence-based practices. And I do understand that completely. There need to be, sort of arguments put forth in terms of why one way of treatment versus another when you're trying to sort of justify medical costs within a sort of capitalist economy like ours, right? And so I understand that, but I do think that what ends up happening is that often we sort of step into a kind of formula for treatment. And we know all the acronyms of all the different sort of kind of treatment protocols that we use or can use. But I do think there's a kind of tendency to sort of reduce the mystery and the magic of therapy into a sort of recipe And so for me, it's almost like the difference between like using a cookbook to
Mhm.
make food, to make a meal, where, you measure everything exactly, you do everything in an exact order, and that serves exactly this number of people, versus, going out to your garden, seeing what's ripe, picking something, having a friend call, inviting them over, and it's a much more improvisational and emerges kind of in the conditions of the moment.
I'm thinking too, like maybe there's a way that I love this metaphor about cooking, like that maybe there's a way, even if you are following a recipe, that,
Of course.
when we do a recipe a whole bunch of times, like let's say, just like with therapy, when we use a certain method a whole bunch of times, then we can either get kind of on autopilot where we're just doing that method, doing that recipe, or we can really tune in internally and tune into our intuition and bring that into the recipe so that it doesn't become dulled, it doesn't become on autopilot, but stays alive. So like when you're cooking, you can be smelling, sensing, like seeing what the food wants to say to you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And
Mm.
and we always work within some kind of structure or framework, whether
Yeah.
we're kind of consciously aware of it or not. I think we do that naturally. And I think no matter what the framework is or isn't, I think creative opportunities are there. And
Mhm.
what you described as a kind of attunement to sort of
Mhm.
the emerging event or occurrence where, you're tuned, you're attentive, you're staying true to what emerges, and you're responding kind of in real time with that.
Mhm.
And so I don't mean to sound kind of negative about our evidence-based practices or following a protocol or particular intervention. I think creativity can live anywhere. But I think often we have to remind ourselves to sort of remind ourselves of that truth, because it's easy, I think, to fall into a rut. It's easy to
Mhm.
just get stale. And I've certainly experienced that at many times in my life.
Yeah.
And so I think there needs to be a kind of awareness and proactivity in sort of infusing our practices and our lives, with freshness and a kind of open, exploratory attitude.
So tell me about how that became awakened in you. So as you were, you've been a therapist for 10 years, and then somewhere along the way you realized that you needed to create this new business. And so what was it that happened that showed you that this was needed?
I don't think I was so much responding to a need or recognizing a need sort of externally. I think a lot of it was quite honestly my own aging process.
Mm.
When you're my age, or if you've been practicing in a field for a certain period of time, you ripen and you sort of find a way to work that resonates for you. But at my age, I'm starting to wind down, quite
Mm.
honestly. And, when you're in that mode of self-reflection and sort of looking kind of at the totality of your life and your being and your present and what you might have to offer, I think you naturally want to kind of bring everything together. I think that's a
Mm.
natural impulse, because it feels very whole. It feels there's a full feeling, that process, brings.
Mhm.
And so I think that just started happening with me quite naturally. And then, and I'm sure this is true for many of your listeners, I, as a designer, I had been an entrepreneur, actually. I had a design studio in San Francisco, actually, many
Mhm.
years ago. So I had an entrepreneurial background, and I had that impulse, that entrepreneurs tend to be self-starters and very independent. So I was feeling that sort of awaken in me as well. And I stumbled upon this sort of world of sort of social media and online businesses. And so I think I started just braiding things together and seeing that the online platform could offer a good venue for me to sort of bring together, my visual communications background, kind of my interest in art and design and creativity, and therapy sort of all together. So it was more kind of sensing the opening of an opportunity in the environment than necessarily, getting frustrated as a therapist and feeling like, oh, what therapists need is X, Y, Z. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it was very I guess the word is organic. It was a very kind of organic unfolding.
And intuitive.
Yes.
And so, what are some of the ways that I'm wondering if you have any rituals or habits or strategies that you use and maybe those things actually sound very uncreative the way I put them, but what are the ways that you have of kind of getting yourself into creativity and to be more creative in your daily life?
Well, quite honestly, I think I pay attention, in a pretty, not, I think that there are ways of paying attention that are very sort of narrowing and restrictive, and that really are kind of good for certain things. Like, again, when we're trying to sort of problem solve in a sort of logical way, but it hardens our attention in a certain way. And so I think when your attention sort of softens and becomes more diffuse, you start to notice different possibilities and opportunities. And so I think I sort of maybe just over the years have naturally developed an ability to sort of oscillate between those two things and just always sort of notice opportunities. So I'll just give you an example. This was a couple of years ago. Again, totally out of the blue. It was not something I'd planned or ever thought I would do. But I was having a conversation with a good friend who knows me and my life kind of pretty well. And she just said, just kind of in passing, your story, my life story is kind of such a kind of quintessential sort of American story. It needs to be, it would be great if somehow was known or you did something with that. And I thought, oh, isn't that interesting? And I thought, gosh, I wonder what that might be. I just kind of entertained it in conversation. And I think what she said just kind of planted a seed. It wasn't like I got gung-ho about anything, but I think a seed was planted. And I think it germinated. And I thought, well, maybe I can write something. I've written some essays and stuff here and there. And I thought, well, maybe I could write. But I actually rarely read fiction. And I'm not, I'm a nonfiction sort of person. And so I thought, well, I wonder what it could be. And then it just kind of things sort of drift into my consciousness out of nowhere. And that's actually what happened when I became a therapist, quite honestly. But this idea came into my mind I could see sort of a film, like a movie. And I ended up writing a screenplay. And it was a pilot for a TV series. And it was based on my life, so a biracial girl coming of age in the era of civil rights Woodstock and the Vietnam War. And I knew nothing about screenwriting. I had never written a screenplay. I didn't really know anything about that world. And I was working, in addition to everything else. And so anyway, I ended up writing this screenplay. Nothing has come of it yet. But I actually made the first cut of a Sundance competition for their episodic story lab, and which I'm proud of. Again, nothing's come of it as of yet, but it was the kind of thing where I know that maybe in describing it, it seems like, oh, this huge project, but it didn't feel like that. I would literally have little breaks in the day, like 15 minutes. And I would just sort of sit down, and in my mind, I would sort of see a scene, and I would start, seeing the characters speak to each other in the scene, and I would make little notes. And so I guess what I'm trying to kind of share with you and everyone who's listening is that creativity doesn't have to be a big deal with a capital C. And I think what I do and encourage others to do is sort of creativity with a little c. Because that makes it seem less scary, less like a big deal, less threatening. And it becomes a much more sort of natural, everyday practice. I mean, you asked about practices and routines. It becomes just something you do, 15 minutes here, 10 minutes there, maybe a weekend here and there. But, the effort is sincere and genuine and concerted. But there's something about sort of the everydayness of it that just makes it something that happens almost on its own. And so I think, I've done a lot of work in the addictions area, and I often will talk about balancing effort and ease. And I feel like that's the secret kind of in living. You need both. You need the
Yeah.
effort, but it can't just be kind of nose to the grindstone, like try, 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 try. You get burned out. And it can't just be totally laid back because then you don't produce. It's always sort of a dreamy something that never quite gets finished. So I would say creativity with a small c, every day,
Mm.
and not a big deal.
Not a big deal. Not about what's going to come of it, but being in that process, being alive to that process.
Yes. And I would say I would use the words giving yourself to the work. Giving
Mm-hmm.
yourself to the work. And often, I mean, I'm sure I'm as egocentric as anybody else. We can get so caught up in our idea of, oh gosh, I'm going to be a screenwriter, I'm a therapist, I'm a whatever. And that can end up being a kind of burden that we carry because we feel we have to sort of uphold a sense of identity. But when you kind of give yourself to the work and you really kind of surrender to it, something new can appear that is sort of you and not you at the same time.
Mm.
And I think that can happen in a session too. When you really kind of give yourself to the session and being with the client, I find that same experience happens there as well.
Mm.
And there's something sort of transformational that happens on its own because that's the impulse that's present.
And so, do you think then that therapists, when we are doing more of that creativity with a small c throughout our day, whether it's about how we're cooking or how we're, maybe we're drawing something, maybe we're writing something, however it is that it comes out for people, do you think that when we're engaged in that way, it changes the way that we are clinicians?
I do. I do
Mm-hmm.
feel that it does. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm not a scientist. I don't pretend to be. And quite honestly, I don't want to be.
Mm-hmm.
That has not been my choice in life. But I do think something transformational happens when we are able to, I often use the term be with, and being with is its own sort of thing. It's different from sort of contriving or forcing, or there's a gentleness to it and a kind of by itselfness to,
Mm.
you're sort of letting things be as they truly are. And when you allow that, again, transformation happens on its own. At least that's been my experience. But my experience both as a therapist, but also as a person who has been helped by other people,
Mm-hmm.
many people in my own life. I've been helped by any great number of people, some of whom have been professional helpers. I'll admit that.
Yeah.
And what has been helpful is that almost sort of like letting things be as they are, having the permission to just be as I am with my imperfections.
Mm.
And that's, and I think quite honestly, my experience being on the what I would call the healing end of that, I think is what led me to become a therapist, because it wasn't something. I'm not one of those people who always wanted to be a therapist. In fact, I never thought of being a
Mm-hmm.
therapist. But I am someone who's been, I think, very deeply helped by others. And when I've gone back to sort of look at those experiences and what has been the most supportive, it has had that quality of being allowed to be.
Mm.
And so I do try to be with, my clients. And I think that's the main thing that I bring. And in the simplicity of that, something creative tends to emerge.
Mm.
Something happens, something transforms.
That's interesting. One of my mentors over the years, her name is Ricky Bowden. She has said that our goal in therapy sessions is to have access to all the parts of ourselves, to have access to our whole selves.
Yes.
And it feels like that really fits with what you're saying, that there's trust in, if you're with your whole self and you're bringing your whole self into the room, then you're so much more able to be with whatever is happening, be with your client, and able to trust that, maybe you've got all those recipes, but you can trust what's going to emerge.
That everything you said just now really resonates for me. I think that's true, because when we do allow our whole self to be present, it's an invitation to the client for their whole self to join you. And I think, again, I think that's so very, very important, that invitation to be present. And, I work a lot with people who, as I'm sure all of us as therapists do, anxiety is so prevalent in our modern world, right? And I find that, kind of looking deeply, at anxiety, and I've had periods in my life that have been extremely anxious, but I think, anxiety and control are so closely linked, and anxiety often is sort of the flip side of feeling one does not have control or is out of control, right? But I do feel like, when we are able to sort of be with the totality of our experiences as human beings, which includes discomfort, anxiety, sadness, grief, terror, we only want the good stuff, right? But we get everything. But that everything, that is the blessing of our life, to have that fullness. And I think that when we're able to bring, again, that fullness that you described to our sessions, I think that is really, really a wonderful thing for client and therapist alike.
For you, why are therapists the people who you want to bring this work to, as opposed to just, working people, anxious people?
Thank you. Quite honestly, one of the things that made me want to leave design, because I had been in the design field for decades, it was what I was formally trained in, what I was practiced in. My resume was organized around being a designer and a design educator. And so, but at the same time, I never really felt at home in that professional community. I don't know why. I just never quite resonated with the design sort of professional community, even though, to this day, I have friends who are wonderful designers, of course. But there was something about the field of practice that just didn't seem to fit me very well. And I've never felt that way as a therapist. I've always felt like I found sort of the community of practice that felt right for me. And so I think for me, it was just natural to want to kind of offer whatever it is that I have to offer to this community, because
it's the
one I identify with, and I think the work we do is important. I think the work we do is very important. And I see, among my colleagues, I do see I see suffering, I see burnout. And I see at times, not always, but I see periods of stuckness or frustration. And I think, again, I call, creativity a kind of Swiss Army knife sort of all-purpose tool. And I do think creativity has so much to offer some of those problem areas that we kind of come up against in the work that we do. So for me, it was kind of a natural to want to offer this to this community.
Excellent. I can relate to that. Absolutely. This is my community.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So
we're at home.
We're at home. We're in the community. We're in the clubhouse together.
Yes. I like that. I see a tree house. In my mind, I visualize us sitting in a tree house.
Me too. Me too. In my mind, it's pink, but it doesn't have to be.
Why not? I like pink.
So now, I guess one question I have for you about, let's say there's a therapist who's listening, who's kind of stuck and is feeling some of what you just described about just feeling a little bit stuck, maybe beginning to feel burnt out. How can she start bringing more intuition? I kind of want to say more magic, intuition, creativity into her life.
Well, what I hear in stuckness is often maybe too much concerted effort in a single direction. And so I would say to try to introduce some ease, that would be the first thing that comes to mind for me. Now, how to do that, and again, I'm just sort of drawing on the sort of visual area. That's the one that I'm familiar with. Doodle. Start to doodle. Start engaging in a physical practice that has a certain amount of ease built into the form. right?
Mm-hmm.
Some people try to do things like, meditation or some kind of mindfulness practice, but then they get all stressed out because I'm not doing it right or whatever, right? So even that
Totally.
doesn't work, right? Forced relaxation never works.
Yeah.
It's just more anxiety provoking. So I would say in the visual area, I think doodling is a wonderful thing to do. If you do any kind of crafting practice that isn't overly meticulous, but that has some ease to it, maybe collaging or doing some kind of knitting or crocheting, something that involves a material engagement, I think can also really be helpful. And then also, I trained in somatic experiencing, so I do a lot of sort of sense and body oriented kind of work as well. I would say some simple movement as well, moving, just taking walks,
Mm.
observing as you walk, kind of not too quickly, not too slowly, just paying attention to what's around. But again, what I often hear when I hear about stuckness is a kind of concerted effort over a period of time that is maybe a little over focused. So some diffusion by introducing ease and easing practices is what comes to mind.
Excellent. Excellent.
And of course, taking a deep breath, we all do that. I think that's a wonderful sort of built-in, capacity that we have to sort of, and in doing that, we can also just remind ourselves, it's a way of reminding that we need this ease, right now.
And what, if someone explores working with you through this new business, what would they be doing with you right now? Would it be individual coaching or group coaching?
Well, this is my latest creative effort.
Yeah.
And, I actually am in the process of still kind of finishing my initial course offering.
Yeah.
And trying to figure out, I will be offering a combination, either together or separately of an online course on creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And I will also be offering coaching. The online course will be accompanied by group coaching that will be offered online. And again, I'm hoping to do my beta launch by the end of the year.
And I just want to say, I mean, I know you know this, you've got this whole background, but I just want to say I love hearing that you're doing it this way, that you're beta testing and just getting it started.
Yes. Yeah.
You're staying in the exploration of what it will look like, but also just getting started, that if people can get so stuck in thinking like they've got to have it perfect before they start, but there's actually there's no perfection, but there's also no way to get it great without starting.
Right. And I'm happy to talk about that as well. I mean, if you're interested in that, because I know there must be entrepreneurs among your listeners too who are maybe trying to figure out sort of what their next steps are.
Mm-hmm.
And everything you said it's so easy to just go down a rabbit hole of just overwhelm and lostness because there's so much possibility, and there might be new learning involved in terms of technology or marketing or any number of things. And so it is very easy to get overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
But that's part of the creative process too. And one of the things that I'm having to remind myself in this, new entrepreneurial creative journey that I'm going on is I've had to remind myself also to introduce ease, that I'm getting stuck, that I need to back off, that it's getting a little frayed and a little too messy, that I'm not meeting my deadlines. I'm going through all of that muck, as well. So I know exactly like what that's about. And, and I think for me, what's helped is just reminding myself that's part of the creative process too. Sometimes it is a messy jumble. It really is. And you got to kind of you got to see it for what it is and go, okay, it's a messy jumble. And now how can I kind of smooth out some of the messes? And, you take some time off, take a deep breath and, dive back in. But, I think so often when we have a sort of vision that we want to realize, we can get very, again, so, kind of so attached to some image of what things are going to be. And then we get really freaked out if we come up against obstacles, but that's part of the creative process. And, for me, and especially developing the online course, part of it, it's like, I've really had to like struggle with the content, and like I'm still researching and revising and editing out pieces of things and discovering new things and going, oh my goodness, I can't believe I didn't think to put that in there, And that's part of it too. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's so interesting, everything you're saying. I just worked with a group of people to create their either beta version, or for some of them, it was a revamping of some kind of online program, or for some folks, in-person program.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that stuff comes up. Like all of that stuff
Yeah,
comes
it
up
sure
for
does.
everyone.
It sure
And
does.
it
Yeah.
was so normalizing for folks to see that even though once something is launched, a lot of times it looks really slick and it looks like, it all makes sense and it's always been there, that's not how anything starts. Everything starts with experimentation and failure and stumbling and figuring it out. So,
Right.
yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've been there many, many, many times. There's actually an expression in design. It's called fast failure. With
Yes.
design, it's not like you don't fail. In fact, you fail often and frequently. And you
Mhm.
want to do that. You want it to be as frequently as possible, because that's how you iterate and refine. And that's how that's how you find out what's not working and you make your improvements.
Yeah.
So that is all part of it, but you're right. Definitely, when you see something that's sort of up and running, it all just seems like it was always that way. That it kind of sprang into being fully formed, and
Yeah.
it's never like that. It's always it's always kind of messy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love how, this is really coming full circle to where that creativity and intuition and ease is so helpful for entrepreneurs.
It really is, because I think
Yeah.
it is stressful to launch a new business,
Yeah.
and often there are so many sort of hopes and dreams kind of attached to that, as well as fantasies of financial success. I mean, that's a huge part of it
Mhm.
too, right?
Mhm.
And so there is a lot, sort of quite literally, like banking on kind of the success of the entrepreneurial kind of venture.
Mhm.
And so that can be stressful. It definitely can be. And yeah. And so I do think, creativity has a lot to offer there, in terms of, as you said, the effort, the ease, taking a deep breath. It's like taking time out, being good to yourself, not being
Mhm.
too single-minded about everything. And yeah, it has its place there, definitely.
Mhm. So, Loretta, if you were going to time travel to when you first started in private practice, what would
Hmm.
you tell the Loretta of that moment?
Wow. Gosh, that's interesting. That the journey is going to be even more surprising than I thought it would be.
Mhm. Okay.
Because it has turned out to be that way. Always, it's been a delight every step of the way, but it's been much more surprising and unpredictable than I would have thought. I don't know.
Excellent. And I would hope if that were going to happen and you were going to talk to your former self, I would hope that you would include that laugh because it's so great. So
Why not?
great. And what is the best place for therapists to find you, throw compliments at you, and learn about this new program?
I do have a website. My URL is morecreativetherapist.com. And I actually do have a free 5-day email video mini course with an accompanying workbook. And the course is called More Creative in 5 Days.
Oh, great.
And that's readily available. You'll find a couple buttons there where you can sign up. And
Excellent.
I also have just a little announcement of this beta course. If anyone's interested in that, being a beta tester, that you can sign up there as well.
Good.
MoreCreativeTherapist.com. Yep.
Yeah. So I hope that a lot of people will, I'm going to take you up on this offer of the free
Yeah, check it out.
5 day. Yeah.
Nothing to lose.
Thank you so much, Loretta. It's been such a pleasure talking to you.
Appreciate having this opportunity. It's been wonderful to talk with you. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you're looking to get unstuck in your business, we want to help. Go to coachingwithannie.com and get started. I would especially recommend doing the 30-day networking challenge. You're going to find that under free trainings at coachingwithannie.com. The 30-day networking challenge can absolutely help you change your business profoundly. I will see you next week.